One of the nation's most respected psychotherapists on trauma is here in Seattle, and Robin Shapiro is with us tonight. On Public Exposure, I'm Stan Emmert. Robin, thank you very much for spending some time with us tonight.
You're so welcome. Thanks for having me.
You know, and as I've gotten to know you a little bit, you're so pleasant, and I would expect a psychotherapist to be stern.
Stern does not work in psychotherapy. It's all about the relationship. You can do any technique. If you can't connect with your clients and they don't feel safe with you, it's not going to work.
And by the way, your latest book is Trauma Treatment Handbook, and we're going to talk an awful lot about trauma and PTSD and the kinds of things that are difficult subjects, but maybe, just maybe, we'll learn from you that there's a lot more around than what we expected.
There's a lot of trauma and some great treatments for it.
And you are particularly a specialist, if that's the right word, in EMDR. And in fact, your website is emdrsolutions.com. We're going to be sure to get the website up for more information. But tell us, EMDR, a comprehensive integrative therapy approach, just what is it?
EMDR should be called reprocessing therapy. It brings pieces of a lot of other kinds of therapy together. It brings in the cognitions, it brings in feelings, body awareness, and the picture of the trauma, bundles it together. And then you add a bilateral stimulation of one kind or another. Could be taps, one side, the other side, could be sounds in the ears, or could be like this. And what happens is it moves from the back of the brain, if you were doing brain imaging during it, which people have done, where people are feeling, oh no, it feels like it's happening again, and then moves it towards more feelings. Things start moving from whatever you started with through, like the whole car accident, and then ends up with how angry people are with their insurance companies is the last thing they clear, and then it's gone. I have, with simple trauma and EMDR, cleared horrible rapes or car accidents or one-time traumas in 1 or 2 sessions, and it's amazing and about the fastest thing out there because it brings so many things together.
So the E is eye movement. That's
Yeah.
the E and the M.
Even though a lot of people don't use eye movements for it.
No, I don't understand what
it was invented with eye movements. And the woman, Francine Shapiro, no relation to me, who came up with it, thought it was desensitization, which is another kind of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out, once we developed the kinds of brain scans that shows what it is, it's instead of desensitization,
Mm-hmm.
it's integrative. It integrates the parts of consciousness and actually the brain that knows it's now and whatever happened is over, you're safe, you're in the therapist's room, you're okay, with the part in the primitive back of the brain that's going, it's still happening, we're all gonna die.
Mm-hmm.
And brings that really forward to consciousness so people say, oh, now when I think of the accident, the rape, the person who shot at me, it's like way out there. I know it's over now. It's not in my body anymore.
It sounds like incredibly interesting, but very difficult work. A psychotherapist here in Seattle, actually, Deborah Woolley, says, I am drawn to trauma therapy because it offers me an opportunity to do something about the brokenness all around us. And I was struck by that because is there brokenness all around us, besides with the political system? But we won't go there.
Yeah, I can go there. Okay, not today. Yes, nobody escapes trauma, but depending on how they started out and then what happened to them, it can affect people deeply, or it can, in fact, change the way people are in the world, so that they're always, in Star Trek parlance, in shields up, phasers on stun, it's going to happen. Or feeling that there's no one they can trust, or doing the same, what we would think of as dysfunctional thing over and over again because of the tracks in their brain.
Now, as we air this show live on May the 19th, 2011, it's been within the past year that someone sat right there in that chair who was a Vietnam veteran. He had written a book about his experiences in Vietnam. Even though it was a fiction book, it really was about him.
Right.
Very significant cases of PTSD. He got very nervous during the interview. He was tapping. He actually scared me. And he said at one point in time that I still kill every night, and I am still sorry for living. This is years later.
And if he went to a good trauma therapist, this could clear. I have worked with several Vietnam vets 20, 30 years after, longer. I worked with somebody in the last year and who had a horrible PTSD. We cleared it.
So, but PTSD, we here in the Northwest, because there's so much of a military presence here, we think of PTSD as something for people who have been through war. We don't think of it about in other ways.
Well, there's PTSD and there's trauma. PTSD, in the books about it, is something that you thought was going to kill you, or almost did, or hurt somebody around you. But there's a lot of trauma that is not about war, is not about almost dying. If you had a very critical parent, you can be traumatized. And I've written about people who have what I call hunkered down depression. They walk through life like this, wanting to please you, not wanting to do it wrong, and never feeling like they're okay because that's what they were told. They never got to be found delightful, which all children need.
Well, let's talk about some various parts of various things related to trauma. Best case, coming right from your book, traumatic event with few lasting effects.
Okay, let's say you're driving here today and you almost had a car accident. And let's say you had a pretty good childhood and that you had a body that isn't too anxious, just you weren't born that way. In which case, you could have something like this, you feel it in your body for a while, and then you automatically go, that was a close one, it's over, I'm okay. And maybe you have a bad night's sleep and work through it in your sleep, and the next day you're fine, you don't have trouble driving, you really resettle down to normal.
Can I ask you, do people work through things in their sleep?
Yes. There are a bunch of researchers that have found in REM sleep, people are often working through stuff from the day before or from the life before. And often the nightmares that people with full-blown PTSD have are an attempt to work through it that doesn't work. They need more push. They need some therapy or something that will push it through. Okay,
so the best case we just talked about, that's a traumatic experience, we got over it.
Yeah.
Medium bad, again, from the book. Traumatic event, acute stress, and then PTSD.
Okay, acute stress is what happens. The car hit. You maybe weren't too injured, but still injured, and you know, the ambulance came, they had to cut you out of the car, you get there, you're basically okay, but you are having flashbacks every day, you're nervous, you don't really want to get in a car, so you're avoidant. Maybe you start drinking a little more, doing whatever your drug of choice or your computer game of choice is. And
we're going to come back to that one, by the way. Isn't it interesting that she said your drug of choice or your computer game of choice, but keep going on.
Same drug, actually. Okay, and then later on, after a certain amount of time, it officially becomes PTSD. It doesn't go away. You go back to your normal life, you feel okay, and part of you is in normal, and part of you feels intruded upon by what happened. You're intruded upon by the images, by every time you get in a car and you see a white car out of the corner of your eye, your whole body gets on red alert because it's trying to warn you to keep you from doing it again. And that's in the very primitive brain back here.
And then there are complex traumatic stress disorders. So
Yes.
that's even worse than that.
Oh, yeah. These are people often who started out with trauma or poor attachment. Attachment is, do you have kids?
Yes.
Attachment is what you feel towards them. Attachment is what they feel towards you when you look back and forth, you're feeling the same thing, you find them delightful, they cry and it hurts you, and that's attachment. Kids who didn't have that don't, according to Dan Siegel and a bunch of other smart people, don't grow the places in their brain to calm themselves down. And so what happens is when the bad thing happens, they don't have the ability to self-soothe. Then more bad things happen, and they're in a constant state of this. Just, they can't relax. Often they get eating disorders because they can't eat. They use, not everybody with this stuff uses compulsive behaviors or drugs, but they really are always feeling stress in their lives.
So if they weren't held, loved, if they weren't treated with affection when they were 6 months old, then
6 months old, a year old, 3 years old, you know, it makes a huge difference in growing what happens in the brain that helps you deal with feelings, and they are more susceptible to full-blown PTSD.
can you get over it?
Yes. Good therapy and lots of kinds of good therapy help you get over it. This is where the cognitive therapies aren't so good, but some of the psychodynamic therapies and any good therapy done with a therapist that connects well can do it. And sometimes, like marrying somebody with a good heart who connects, grows that attachment later. Sometimes you just have to find a good one.
Now, your book is written for other psychotherapists and other therapists.
Yeah.
And I noticed that there was an assessment section and when you were assessing a patient, and there's a bunch of questions that are asked. And I found them really kind of interesting about, is there depression in your family? You know, are you anxious? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
What is it that you as a psychotherapist really need to know from a patient before you can figure out how to help them?
So if I've got somebody with just one bad thing that happened and I'm not getting their whole history, I kind of do a quick and dirty assessment. And I find out if they were born to be anxious. I call these the skinny, nervous people of the world. They're not all skinny, but a lot of them are. Okay. And I know them well. I married one. Okay. Is there depression in the family? How was the attachment? I'll ask them, how do you know your mom loves you? And if they start melting and, oh, because blah, 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 good attachment, you know. If they go, I don't know, then I know something possibly about their ability to handle the stress. I ask them some questions about, to find out how dissociative they are.
What does that mean?
Well, we all dissociate sometimes, and we go into different states, but do you spend a lot of time spaced out and then come back to the room and kind of go, oh, I don't know how much time passed? And if they answer that, I might start asking questions like, do you ever find things in your closet you didn't buy that you don't remember? Yeah. Do people ever talk to you that say you met them and you absolutely don't remember? And they said, well, we did this and this and that together. Yeah, and then I'm looking at major dissociation, and I know we're not going to do a one-shot deal. It's going to take a while. So I look at that sort of thing, and then, of course, the degree of whatever happened to them.
We're going to take a very short break. We're very fortunate today to have Robin Shapiro with us, who is one of the nation's leading psychotherapists on trauma, PTSD, and particularly on trauma treatment and the various resources that there are for therapists with trauma treatment. If you want more information, go to her website, emdrsolutions.com. You'll learn an awful lot more. Or you can also pick up this book, and you'll be surprised. I mean, I was surprised because this book is written for other therapists. I found the book very, very readable. It is a trauma treatment handbook, and it's available everywhere, I think. So I'm going to skip over. We're going to go to Dan Siegel. You mentioned him. He says this: the mind can be defined as an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. I found that really kind of interesting. I thought that therapists dealt with how I think and how I feel. He seems to be saying we're talking about energy.
Well, he's talking about that in very specific ways. There's energy right now between us, just two people talking. And actually, human beings regulate each other. They have found out that babies who sleep with their moms when they're little keep breathing and don't have sudden infant death because they're regulated just by the presence of their mom right there.
Yeah, but what happens when it's time for the baby to, not be a baby and go to her own bed or his own bed?
They don't like it very much. But the fact they have been regulated helps them self-regulate. It builds places, especially in the right brain, of self-regulation if they've been seen. And so he talks about this energy flow between, and he also talks about embodied. You can have therapy that just deals with what you think, but we hold our feelings down here. And he shows a way that anybody at home can do to regulate some. Put one hand, left hand on your belly, right hand right here, and breathe a little bit. And it calms down the body by calming down the vagal nerve. And you can't do that by thinking about it. You have to bring it to the body.
We've got hours and hours of show left. However, we can't do that. So instead I want to go to some specific circumstances, particularly trauma and self-destructive behavior. We have some, many pictures coming up here, and there's smoking, there's alcohol, there's meth addicts, there's overeating, and there's incredibly undereating.
And cutting on yourself.
Cutting on yourself.
Yeah.
These self-destructive behaviors, is that trauma related?
Not necessarily, but it certainly can be. Our brains like to be high, and runners get a runner high. Food makes us feel good. We like to feel good. And when we feel bad, and trauma can make us feel bad, so can other things. But trauma can make us feel bad, and so people will use whatever their drug of choice is. They'll drink. I once worked with a woman who had a death in her family and started gambling for the first time in her life. I've worked with other people who were fine until the trauma hit, and they became addicted.
Well, we have a picture of an anorexic woman here. And, all I can think about is Karen Carpenter, this incredible voice, who entertained me when I was a child. And it was amazing. But then what happened to her, I guess, what happened to her? Where was her trauma from?
Well, I could give you another couple hours on what happened to her. But essentially, for her, there were two things. Number one, she was in show business, and you're supposed to be skinny, and image is everything. And control, control, control. She was a skinny, nervous person to start with. It's scary to be out there in the spotlight, and she handled that. If you don't eat, if you starve yourself, the endorphins go up, and you have like morphine in your system, opiates in your system. And actually, they just figured out cannabinoids, so you get high two different ways. When you starve yourself, or when you way overeat, or when you cut yourself, or you can take something that does it, like any amount of drugs and alcohol.
So you've said cut yourself a couple of times. So people cut themselves not for the purposes of committing suicide, but just to cut themselves?
Yeah, there people can cut themselves to commit suicide, but most people who do that kind of self-destruction to the body are doing it because they feel so awful. If they do this, they have another feeling. First, when you see blood, and I haven't done this myself, okay, but when you see blood, it's kind of shocking and it jolts you.
Yes.
And then when you have pain, just like if you knock your elbow or your knee against something, after a few moments, it kind of goes away. And that's when the opioids that are in your brain kind of are released into your system. And they feel better afterwards. But it's not a great thing because it doesn't teach you how to deal with the feelings. If you go to therapy and you clear this stuff out, you don't have to cut.
Yeah, but it's one thing to, you know, to be playing basketball, because that's what I did and still do, but to play basketball, you get hurt,
Yeah.
and you know you're going to get over and you go keep running around. And it's quite another thing to go keep running into the wall.
Well, if running into the wall is the only way that you know how to change the way that you feel, and how you feel is intolerable, then you do all kinds of things to yourself.
Let's go to some other examples. Trauma in the accident victim. You talked about being in a car wreck. Let's say that you were the driver.
Okay.
And you hit a child, and the child died.
Okay. At that point, you are dealing with everybody who has a car accident, even if they're sitting at a stop sign and get hit, feels responsible, because we like to think we have the illusion of control. You hit a child, though, you are going to feel horrible, and the trauma of knowing you did that is usually worse than the accident itself. And this is movable. If you were drunk and you did it, you know, it wasn't like you were going down the street, the kid ran in front of the car, you backed over a kid you didn't see, is one thing. What has to happen is a lot what we also do with some soldiers who have a lot of guilt, which is, what have you learned from this? And possibly, how can you make amends? Can you work within, can you give money to an injured children's place? Can you do something that helps something? What can you do? You can't fix this child. What can you do that allows you to forgive yourself?
It's interesting that you would mention the soldier with PTSD, because that's a circumstance that, for the most part, he probably or she didn't put themselves in.
But they have guilt for not saving their buddy, even though they couldn't have done anything, or for they're human, and if they kill another human, they can feel pretty terrible about it.
You talked before about drug of choice or computer game of choice. That was interesting.
Yeah.
Computer game of choice.
Yes. Mine would be bookworm. Okay.
Well, my daughter's is Angry Birds, but she doesn't play it that much.
Yeah.
But my question is, that's really a drug, or akin to a drug?
Why do I play it? It's fun. It calms me down. You know? Do you have any computer games that you adore?
No, actually, I don't.
You like to run around.
I like to run around and play basketball.
But the mastery actually gives us good drugs.
Huh, okay.
So, you know, it's anything that you do that you can get better at.
Let's talk about something that's in the news a lot.
Okay.
And it's bullying. Two kinds of bullying, with, kids who will take 3 of them and bully 1.
Yeah.
Or cyberbullying.
Yeah.
Trauma is real, isn't it?
It is. I have done so many sessions on so many adults where the major trauma in their life was bullying. You know, guys who were locked in their lockers by the other guys, especially middle school age. It's terrible because that's when kids are kind of learning their power and the social hierarchy heats up, and otherwise nice kids can turn into absolute jerks, and they go after the ones who are quieter or weaker. They don't go after the alphas. They go after the easy targets, and it can be horrible and can affect relationships for years later.
So for years. So how do you break through?
Well, if in an adult, you remind people that they're an adult, and often I do ego state work in the midst of the EMDR and some other things. Ego state work, send the adult back. Okay, think of that 14-year-old who was really getting it from those awful girls. Go back, and I would like you to pull her up here right into my office. You got her? Would she let you put your arm around her? Great, do that. Now, can you tell her that she wasn't a jerk? Because we already established she wasn't. Can you tell her, show her that you're, 40, you're successful, you're smart, you got a degree, you got a job, you got a, And now can you tell her that if anybody tries to go after you, they can't do it anymore because you know how to tell them language that I cannot use on television. And they said, can you feel that? Tell her. And I was like, yeah, and this is with somebody who's not a real mess. Okay, great. Does she got it? Yeah. Now pull her inside. Just hug her right into you now. She inside? Does she know she's an adult now? Great. And I might have been doing EMDR on that stuff, but this is like the icing on the cake. This is where they get it.
We basically have a minute left.
Yeah.
I'm shocked that it's gone so fast, but I have to ask for permission to be a little bit personal. My father died in December. My parents were married for 67 years. Will my mom's grief ever go away?
Yes. The stages I talk about in grief are, well, the rules is that it lasts longer than you think. It hurts more than you think it will. And then it clears. She will always miss that guy. Always. 67 years of attachment. But she will get to the point where it's not acute grief and she remembers her attachment to you, the grandkids, her friends, and gets present and here again. But it will be a long grief.
We're going to have to close the show with that. Robin Shapiro, Trauma Treatment Handbook and Trauma and Psychotherapy. Goodness. EMDRsolutions.com. We'll see you right here next week on Public Exposure. Take care.